Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mac Life Podcasting. My name is Steve Makovic. Today, we have a local cognitive, behavior, and mental health expert, psychological researcher, a doctoral candidate, Brandon Dufresne. Hi, Brandon. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking, Steve.
That is good. So, today, I guess that we're going to jump into men's mental health.
We could jump into all different kinds of topics related to mental health. I've certainly had plenty of observations over the years.
Absolutely.
And quick disclaimer before we start, I am a licensed psychotherapist, but this is not clinical advice.
Perfect. Always got to get the legalities
we
in
just
there.
Sneak that one in.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long have you been doing this?
Almost 5 years.
5 years now?
Which in therapeutic circles is an eternity. Most therapists, I should say, generally last about 7 years before they burn out and do something else.
Really?
Yep.
Well, let's hope you get another 7 years.
I feel good at this point.
That's good. Fantastic. So I guess today we're going to touch on some subjects in a philosophical kind of way.
Sure.
I think we're going to get into attachment styles.
Great.
We're going to get into your mental health on being alone and on your own. Pretty much being by yourself, specifically after, I would say, going through like a breakup, a separation.
Sure, any of these major life changes.
Yeah, anything that changes that. We're going to get over men's mental health, anxiety, depression,
Yes.
those kind of topics today.
And even for the men's mental health, too, I think for any of your female listeners, there would be a lot for them to learn, too.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I mean, mental health is mental health. I mean, sure, there's some specifics, gender specific.
Sure.
But I would say it's pretty much a cover-all blanket.
For the most part, yes. So you do have more, I guess, biological differences between men and women that no matter what you do, they will show themselves. But yes, by and large, it's mostly a blanket when it comes, especially your major disorders. Again, anxiety and depression are easily the most common.
Right. No, I could definitely see that. I mean, recently I've actually had some experiences with those, and I've been kind of going through that process of healing and educating and learning and those kind of things. So a big one that was one that I really didn't have a lot of experience with was depression.
Okay.
That was definitely something that crept up out of nowhere. I'm sure a lot of people kind of experience that day to day. Now I have a different view and empathy for people that are going through depression. Yeah, that's a very difficult subject.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up depression too, because I think a common misnomer that I see quite a bit is this maybe well-intentioned, maybe not, belief that depression is just a stamp or a label. My personal theory is this is primarily driven by pharmaceutical companies, for example. I think, and I've seen where people view depression as like a stamp, like I have it or I don't. And in therapeutic circles, that's not how it's understood at all. Depression, by definition, is cyclical, meaning it waves in and waves out. So we have certain points during our life where we feel more depressed, and we have certain points during our life where we feel less depressed or not depressed at all. There are some people who just have depression all the time, but they're really quite rare. I think, again, perhaps because of commercials, again, that's just my own personal theory, it's like, okay, you have depression, so you take this pill and you just don't go off the pill. Sounds beneficial if I'm putting out a medication. And for the record, I don't have anything against the medications. They do quite help. But yes, I have to point out that depression by definition is cyclical. So again, in your case, as you just mentioned, you said it started rolling in recently with a major life change.
Right.
To be expected.
Right.
That's exactly how that tends to go for people.
And it tends to creep up on you out of nowhere.
Yes, yes.
Definitely. And it's amazing how depression goes hand in hand with anxiety.
Yeah.
That was definitely that's definitely a world, and I'm sure a lot of people suffer from that. I mean, it's a double hit. I mean, a lot of people that just can't even get out of bed on the daily, and then people just say, "Oh, it's just a mental thing." Sure, maybe it's a mental thing, maybe it is a chemical imbalance thing, but it still is a really serious problem that you just can't get over.
No, and I mean, there's certainly a lot of behavioral changes, and that's often what you would see in a therapist's office, for example. Behavioral changes that you can make to assist your depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. But yeah, like you said, often they tend to come together. Again, they have different solutions kind of depending on the person, but they tend to be a sign that things aren't okay. So then naturally the next step becomes, okay, what do I do about this feeling that I have?
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of the time it's hard to even realize that. I'm sure a lot of people don't even realize that they're having the depression creep in when it does creep in.
Ooh, that's a really, really good point. Certainly over the years that's been, that's why oftentimes you will do like screenings or questions that, like I mentioned earlier, depression can look different from person to person. However, it does tend to follow a similar trajectory between certain symptoms. And you're right, some people will come in and they don't actually recognize that they're depressed. And the interesting thing too is it kind of permeates itself or leads to other issues that people run into. For example, low motivation. People will just think, yeah, I guess the most stereotypical response I get is that I'm lazy.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that being definitely a side effect of that.
Yes.
And it's not really that it's laziness. It just is, from my experiences, it just overtakes you, and you can't even explain really what it is at the time. And then when you figure out it's depression and you start taking the steps to actually work on it, seeking the help, finding the help that you need,
Yep.
That's when things can start getting better. But it still is very difficult.
You're not wrong. And like you alluded to earlier too, it's going to pop up in different ways. I mean, outside of just your mental health, it affects and will impact your physical health. So you'll have people, for example, that'll come in and they don't really recognize that they're depressed, but they've been getting sick a lot lately. It's like those two are actually connected. So the more depressed I am, the lower my immune response, and the more likely I am to get sick. So depressed people tend to get sick more often.
It's actually amazing how the depression and the stress and the anxiety affects your actual physical health and well-being. It's amazing how it can literally put you down. The mind is a very powerful thing. From what I've learned and what I see and how much it actually has to. Your thought processes, your energy, your Magna Carta, the energy that you put off that's around you and how that it affects your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more. And that's in therapy, that's what I'll often refer to as a double negative. For example, if it's tough, and it sounds so simple on paper, and I'll acknowledge out front that it's not that simple, but if depression is setting its sights on you, then this is why I say it's a double negative, because when you're depressed, you're less motivated to do things. But that's precisely what you need to do to begin to get out of depression.
Yeah, I could see that.
Which seems unfair. When I think of it, it's like, okay, I'm going to take away more. I'm going to take away half of your energy, and I need you to go twice as hard.
Yeah, now I need you to work harder for me.
Yes, harder than you were before to get yourself out. But that is exactly what it often boils down to.
It's why I really believe the people that do overcome depression, anxiety, and those kind of illnesses and major changes that are in their life, they need to be really proud of themselves, because it is a very difficult standard and objective to get over that.
Yes.
So I feel like there should be like a T-shirt that you get when you get over it or something.
To celebrate?
Yeah, to celebrate getting over that. Some sort of award, something other than you finally get your life back.
Yes.
Which is an award all in itself.
Yes, and even as I mentioned earlier too, these things, like even if you take anxiety, and it's another thing I'm just going to like cut off, because I see this misunderstanding of it time and time again, and people kind of think of anxiety only as like, well, and I guess in our terms it would be like generalized anxiety disorder, but the reality is that as human beings we all experience anxiety. If you go outside right now and you're chased by a bear, what you're feeling is anxiety. If you go into a club and you don't like large groups of people, what you're feeling is anxiety. You're not going to not, some people are like, oh, I don't have anxiety. It's like, well, you do. What you really mean is you don't have a disorder of anxiety, but you're going to continue to experience anxiety. It's part of the human condition.
It's funny that you mentioned the going into places of large crowds of people. I used to have that anxiety issue. It actually overtook quite a bit of my life for a long time. The anxiety was so intense when I would go into these places that it would actually ruin the entire night for me. And it would also ruin other people's times that were with me. Because you feel trapped. Like
Yes,
almost
that's
like
a
the
good
walls
word.
are closing in on you. And that was a huge thing that I had to overcome. And I
Tell
came
me
through.
about. You don't have to get too specific, but just tell me about how you were able to overcome that.
Um, I'm going to say definitely taking the time. Well, the first step to solving anything is realizing that there's a problem.
Most definitely.
Once I realized that there was actually a problem, then I was able to start taking the steps, and a lot of that was trying to realize why. What is it about having the large group of people that is making me anxiety ridden to begin with?
That's a great start.
Once I kind of analyzed and targeted into some of the reasons, a lot of them were psychologically that were deep below. A lot of
Sure.
it was probably childhood trauma.
It's almost always connected.
Things that happened when I was young, and
Mm-hmm.
once I started making those connections and disregarding them, realizing that feelings aren't facts.
Mm-hmm.
And once I realized that the feelings that you're actually having, that they can just pass. You can get past that once you realize the factuals are that. Okay, I'll use it's not one of my examples, but some people might be that in a large group of people they feel like they're going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll use that. It definitely wasn't one of mine. Mine were way off.
Sure.
Very weird reasons why I had anxiety in large groups.
Anxiety tends to be irrational.
Yes, it was very irrational. The mind was playing tricks on me.
Sure.
So, but let's just say that it's someone feels like they're going to get hurt, and then they go through the process of, examining that and going, okay, I'm not going to get hurt by these people. They'll think to themselves in their head, they'll say, all right, I'm going to actually see the people that I'm with and realize that none of them are threats, and then get comfortable with doing that. And it's like working on a muscle. What I've learned is that actually getting over mental health problems, it is a muscle. It is something that you have to continuously put yourself in those uncomfortable positions until you actually get comfortable with that position. But also doing it within the realms without freaking yourself out. Because if you go way overboard, you can damage yourself worse.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think you hit on some pretty important points of that and how that would typically be addressed in, let's say, a professional setting. And it's never just as simple. It's only half the answer to say, well, if I feel anxiety about, again, we're talking about, let's say, afraid of being hurt. Then it's half of the equation to say, well, then by definition, I must subject myself to things that my brain rather, would convince me are going to hurt me, so that I can prove to my brain that I'm fine. Right? That's half the battle. That being said, and you kind of touched on it a little bit there, you can't just toss yourself in the fire, so to speak, right? You can't go from 0 to 100, because then you actually run the risk of getting worse. Again, this is where it's helpful to kind of work in a, I guess, more structured setting with a therapist, and break it down into smaller pieces. That's how you would begin to move past anxiety. So you touched on it nicely, and lastly, you used the phrase "facts aren't feelings," and very similar to a concept that I'll typically state to anyone in these types of settings is you have to learn to distrust your brain.
That's a very difficult thing to overcome. Very difficult.
Yes, it's ironic, but we are used to assuming that because we thought it must be true. We do this all the time. All of us will do this constantly. But when it comes to anxiety or any of these other mental health related issues that crop up, your only way out is to acknowledge that I have to learn to distrust what my brain's telling me sometimes. Because let's take a step back. Well, trusting my brain the whole way is ironically what has gotten me here in the first place, right?
Right.
So
right.
I can't then continue to trust everything my brain thinks and then assume that I'm going to make it out of the spot that I'm at.
Absolutely. It's definitely retraining your brain to think down different lines, different thought processes. It's like your brain kind of works like if you're going sledding down a hill, and it's brand new fresh powder on the hill, right? You go down in a toboggan. You make a path. When you make that path and you go back to the top of it, what is the easiest path to go down?
The one you already have been down.
The one you already went down. So it's very difficult to now make a new path, branching off of that. But once you figure out and learn how to accomplish it, it definitely changes your perspective on things in life, very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful metaphor you just said. And yeah, I mean, if we put it in, I guess, more scientific terms, what you're literally talking about is creating new, what are called neural pathways in your brain. So, right, so if my brain is used to going down the exact same slope all the time, then that neural pathway in my brain is used to firing off in any given moment. The only way out is to begin to choose a new path. And just as you kind of alluded to with the snow concept, the more you choose to go down that path and see that everything didn't go how anxious brain told you it was going to go, the easier that's going to become. And over time, you will develop new neural pathways in your brain that begin to show you that the things you thought before aren't true.
It's absolutely fascinating how that works.
It is. I'm such a fan of these types of topics because, like I said, we're all going to experience them at one point or another, whether we're talking about like chronic anxiety or just anxious. There's always something that makes all of us anxious at one point or another. So,
Yeah. Yes. Definitely different experiences in given situations. You know, you can't help it. You're human. This is life.
Yes.
And there's no handbook to this. I mean, there's no way to describe different subjects and things that happen in your life that you can't control, that you're not in control of, and how to handle them.
Correct.
It's not like they taught you that in school.
No.
I mean, they
Which is
didn't
unfortunate.
even teach you how to do your taxes in school.
Yes,
You think
yeah,
that they're going to
that's-
teach you mental health in school?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when you kind of cite what you did there a moment ago, kind of like traumas, right? So,
Yeah.
which is not the same as PTSD. I just have to point that out because people mix that up all the time. But traumas, right? And the thing about trauma is it's subjective, meaning I can take person A and put them through experience A, and they're perfectly fine. And I can take person B and put them through experience A, and it's a serious problem, and they carry it with them for a long time. So we can experience different traumas throughout our lives, and you said kind of some of it's fate, some of it's luck, and yes, that's correct. We can go through something that one person might not think was a big deal, but for that person it was a very big deal. So the important thing would be to begin to understand the why.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how, like what you just said there, how one person may feel as if it's a big deal and another person may not. You know, it just comes down to where you're standing in that position, what your feelings may be. That's where most arguments come from.
Sure.
That's where
Oh,
most
gosh, completely.
issues and everything comes from, is because you're not seeing it through the eyes of the other person.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
know, a lot of people, I think that today, empathy, I think, is a big thing that people need to be more doing and practicing of. I think it would change a lot of the things in the world, a lot of arguments.
All day.
It's like I definitely feel like that particular subject is going to be of the traumas and problems, issues that individual has in
Yes.
that relationship that they need to actually put the work in to fix. But
Yes.
then there's other instances where there are experiences, traumatic events that happen throughout a relationship that then create those damages. Let's just, you're in a relationship, we'll say 5 years.
Sure.
And then damages are done through that relationship.
Yep.
And then,
It's gonna happen.
Yes, of course. I mean, we're humans. You know what I
Yes.
mean? We're going to make mistakes. I mean,
Yes.
there's going to be. Life is a learning lesson. You
Yes.
know, this is just a giant journey, and you're going to learn as you go along. But through those mistakes, sometimes the hardest thing is that they pile up,
Yes.
and then they get held on to,
Mm-hmm.
and then it morphs. So we'll just say that different path that you're going down in your brain, all of a sudden you finally turn to that, and it's a trauma one that then creates issues throughout the relationship later on,
Yes.
because they're not going to be as trusting. Trust is earned. You earn the trust, but then it's so easy to lose that trust.
Yes.
And as time goes on, the chances of you losing the trust are much more better than keeping the trust.
Yes.
Because of time.
Yes.
Every day you can get up and do something great, but the trust
Sure.
isn't going to grow more once it's already given.
Yes.
Once you already have that trust for that person, some people, they're in their relationships, this is my partner, this is what it is, I trust them with my life, there's no more trust to be given. They trust them with everything. No human is going to be perfect every day. You're not going to wake up and just do it. You're not handed a script and say, hey, do it
No.
this way.
Yes, we've all made glaring
So
mistakes.
how do you not expect people to make mistakes and do damage? I think that the biggest thing to a healthy relationship, whether it's through friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship, whatever it may be, is learning how to deal with that, learning how to communication, taking the time to actually figure out how to get past those small moments and rebuild the trust that was there, because it's going to come down. How do you handle that? How do you deal with it? How do you communicate about it? What are your steps that you're going to take to get back to where you were so you can continue with that?
Yeah, I'm happy you used the word communicate. It tends to be exactly the issue 99% of the time, especially if you're talking about couples, right? So you kind of put yourself off into a certain, it usually starts with assumptions, right? Like they do something, you assume what their intentions were. You don't talk about that. You just assume you're right, kind of like what we were talking about earlier with like, you have to learn to distrust your brain sometimes. And if you're talking about change of anything, you have to challenge whatever your preconceived notion was before that. So anyways, on that idea of communication, in order to begin to kind of go down that path, and I'll pick back up on what you said earlier with empathy, I have to understand my partner's needs. Me to go along. Let's say we have a couple and we have one person who loves going out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we have another person who hates going out.
Well, usually opposites attract. So
Indeed.
You probably see that a lot more common than you would expect.
Yes, and
I would assume so.
no doubt. And by having opposites, it affords you a greater opportunity to have that communication that we were talking about earlier. So, again, it's about different needs, and whether that's the individual or the couple, it's up to both people to understand their partner and what their needs are. Again, it could take a lot of energy out of me to, let's say, go out, whereas my partner, they love it and it's easy for them. So there has to be an understanding about that. Like, hey, I might go along with this, but it's difficult for me. So then now if I return that, it's like, what is something that would be difficult for you, but I really love, right? Now we're actually communicating. Now we're actually getting to a point where we're talking about understanding the other person's needs and building that empathy. But all too often we make this assumption that it's just the way our brain says it was, and therein lies the problem. And I tend to use the concept of like a cup. I've already said it in this podcast episode so far, but this idea of a cup that gets filled up or emptied, right? And it's like, okay, well. And we were talking about depression earlier, and if you're talking about depressive symptoms or any type of depression, you have to talk about this concept of, let's say, pouring from an empty cup. It's like, okay, well, if my life is full of, if my day-to-day, week-to-week life is full of things that take energy out of me, and I don't replace them with anything that kind of puts energy back into me, then it is a recipe, no matter what I'm doing, for burning out.
Yeah, burning out. That it happens to the best of us.
Indeed.
No matter how much you try, eventually you're gonna burn out.
Another thing you had mentioned at the beginning, which I keep seeing quite a bit of, a lot in popular culture, is this concept of attachment styles.
Attachment styles, yes, absolutely. That has actually been a really big thing that I've been seeing go around, and that's also actually a very fascinating thing to learn is attachment styles, because it opens up the doors to so many things where you could be like, oh yeah, that happened because of that, or that happened because of that. How much? What have you touched base on that so far?
Sure. So with attachment styles, if we consult the literature or research on the topic, it's pretty well researched at this point.
I could imagine so.
Yes, it's been around for a substantial amount of time, so therefore it's been pretty vetted. Obviously you have anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure as the 4 types, and again, there's quite a lot in the literature that supports it. It's I think probably the most fascinating thing about it is this concept, and I don't think many people who might reference attachment style understand this, but it's rooted in the idea of that being formed before you turn 1 year old. So,
yeah, I actually heard about that the other day, and that was kind of mind-boggling and very opening for me to think about that how much your first year has such an impact on your future.
I think that's probably why it took so long to catch on, because it almost sounds unbelievable, that your first year in life would have a direct impact on how you operate in relationships as an adult. It seems very far-fetched, but that's exactly what it suggests. And so it's both, I tend to think of it as like a blessing and a curse, in that It's very important for you to know what yours is, so you
Right.
can understand how to operate. It's connecting to kind of some of the things we were talking about earlier of understanding yourself. But the other part of it, and I think this is equally as important to understand, if you find yourself, obviously the golden one, if you will, is secure. That's the ideal
Right,
one.
right.
You tend to be most likely to have the most functioning relationships, etc. That being said, of course, we have absolutely no control over what we did when we were between the age of 0 and 1.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important thing for people to recognize when they find out theirs, because the reality is, as unfortunate as this might seem, you had absolutely no control over your attachment style.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and you definitely didn't have any control over it, but I do believe that you can adjust it as time goes on.
100%. You're 100% right with that. You can learn. I tend to think of it as almost working around it, connecting a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about distrusting your brain sometimes, right? If I'm a more avoidant type, and if I just assume my avoidance to be the answer, then it's going to continue to plague me in relationships. So no doubt, you kind of operate around it, but your actual, I guess, stamp of that attachment style was something that you could do nothing about in terms of how you got it in the first place. And it was purely given to you by whomever raised you.
It's like being born into rich or born into poor.
Yeah.
You don't really get the chance to decide which one you want.
No.
So, but luckily with that, I mean, you just work on yourself to figure out the best way to become more secure. And I've noticed that. So you will find, what I've noticed is that the anxious attachment styles will kind of attach themselves
Yes.
to the fearful avoidance.
Yes.
I guess that there's 7 stages in the fearful avoidance, or avoidance just in general, where they're going through it, they're looking for love, they find their love, they get excited, they're excited that they found love, then they find the reasons in their brain to kind of fall out of love, or why they're trying to go somewhere else. Then they break out of it. Then there's the relief period. Then after the relief period, then it's the, oh man, I want to find love again. And then the cycle just continues. And then you have the anxious that is completely attaching to the fearful avoidant, and they keep going after that other individual continuously because of the trauma of being anxious and having they usually have self-worth issues and abandonment issues, and so there then becomes a trauma bond between the two of them, which in the beginning is extremely unbreakable. It's like fireworks. It's very intoxicating, and that may go for a while, and then those traits start to creep into that relationship. And it's like if they were to get together and then realize these things and then become secure through it, or work through these issues, there could be a healing process, and then that relationship can continue. But if you don't, once that trauma bond, and you're working off of those trauma bonds, and you have that, and then there's the toxicity that happens in the relationship, a lot of those relationships will have narcissism in it. And it is extremely hard to get out of a narcissistic relationship, on top of having a lot of the, well, we're not going to get into the borderline issues, but a lot of the experiences that a lot of people have is how hard it is to get out of that relationship because of the fireworks and it just feels so great, and then they develop a certain pattern of ways that they do things. Well, eventually that toxicity takes over, and then it becomes extremely rough. And the arguments that break out, and those
was piggybacking once again off that idea of introverted extroversion. It's coming from that school of thought related to personality, and you also have neuroticism, for example, which is being neurotic. Everyone's probably heard that word, but basically what it means is like you're much more prone to more jumbled emotions, put it that way. And so when we look in the literature at people who have successful relationships, for example, Most successful relationships, if there's someone that would, let's say, score high in neuroticism, because that's how it's kind of valued, it's scored. You would score like, I'm very extroverted, I'm very neurotic, whatever. So if you have one partner who scores high in neuroticism, for that relationship to work, you generally have to be paired with a partner who would score low in neuroticism. It becomes very problematic and much more likely to become toxic when you have two neurotic people attempting to make a relationship work.
Yeah.
So again, it's tying into that personality. You want to be able to find something that meshes these two, and there are ways to do so.
It's amazing the opposite attracting thing, you know what I mean? It's just how I mean, it's like man woman, you know. It's like you got to find the opposite to you.
You have to find someone that can challenge you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also bring something to the table, you know.
Yes.
Having that healthy relationship, you know, it's a lot of people are, it's always 50-50. It should be 100-100. It should be that you're into this person 100%, they're into you 100%. What I'm seeing is the continuous misconnections between a lot of these relationships, and when they start to get together. Dating is absolutely the hardest thing ever, because I don't think people really even know how to connect anymore. I think a lot of people don't even know what they're looking for, honestly. I ask specific questions to possible people that I might even just go out to dinner with or whatever, and it's amazing sometimes the answers that I get in response to it, and how much that people have no clue. They're lost. People today are lost. They're so into social media profiles. They're so lost on these dating apps. Are just horrendous. I mean, they are absolutely killing the idea of connection between one person to another and actually working towards that relationship, because swipe right, swipe left, I'm a stud. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so easy to go on there and replace somebody. And we've made people like Bic lighters. They're extremely replaceable, and it's just a very sad thing to see today. And when you end up in that situation where you're up against that, it's very frustrating. And this is why I'm also seeing that a lot of people are single for 5, 6, 7 years, and they're okay with it. And it's almost because they had to become okay with it. They had to be okay with being alone, and that's a really sad thing. People are made to be with people. I mean, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to say that people are lost as a blanket statement. I think, well, two things. One, there's, three things actually. One, there's a lot of different reasons for that, which again, we could talk all day about the potential reasons. Obviously, you brought up things like dating apps, etc., and certainly that
Facebook, Tinder, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah, the list goes
Snapchat.
on and on. It certainly adds to this feeling of it being overly simple, and sometimes we can develop maybe expectations, high standards. I'm not really sure.
Which made it overly complex.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think it made it damn near impossible almost to really connect with somebody until it's luck. It's really like winning the lottery. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Yes.
So.
I mean, a second part of that too is, right, like what pond are you dipping your toes into? Because there's a lot to be said about that, certainly, and I'm not coming down on people that use dating apps, but you're definitely, I guess, subjecting yourself to a certain type of person, if you will, if you're dipping your toes in that pond versus another pond. And to be clear, I'm not saying either of them are easy. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to use a dating app. I'm just saying you are going to experience a different breed of people. Just the same as, for example, if I go to bars and meet people. Once again, I'm not coming down on people that go to bars, but if we zoomed out enough, and this is what you try to do, this is what I try to do as a therapist, like, if you zoom out enough, there are certain types of people that are most likely to frequent bars versus, whatever, the gym. It doesn't really matter. The list goes on and on. The point is, it's not everybody, and where you're looking makes a massive impact on the type of person generally you're going to find. Of course, you could find, a unicorn in whatever spot you check, but
luck of the draw.
Yes.
Right place, right time kind of scenario.
Exactly.
The question is, where do you go? Especially if you live in places like here. It's very sad here in Buffalo, New York. I mean, winter comes, and it makes, I'll say 4 months out of the year very miserable, very depressing. It's very difficult. Thank God for football.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. But where do you go? It's It's very hard. And a lot of these sites have been made out to just be hookup sites. So people get very discouraged and they're not using them anymore. So what do? You're trapped inside for 4 months out of the year. And then even during the summer, you're so excited to get out that usually you're with family, you're camping, you're here, you're there. Everything's usually by luck. And that's got to be very hard for a lot of people, especially the people that have a hard time being alone. And a lot of people will say that, I've heard it multiple times, that you can't truly be happy in a relationship until you learn to be happy by yourself. That is a topic that I would actually like to touch on.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that statement? Because it's thrown around so much, and I feel as if that is extremely debatable and could be completely torn apart, especially circumstance to circumstance.
No doubt. It can absolutely be torn apart. I'm happy you brought up that particular topic because, once again, we're talking about differences, we're talking about empathy, we're talking about understanding yourself, and the reality is you are going to have people that are more comfortable in a relationship and prefer to be in a relationship. The problem that we run into, and this is the quote, and certainly something that I've learned quite a bit of in listening to people's stories for years, it's different is not wrong. So just because someone's different
That's a fantastic statement. I love that statement.
Yeah, it applies so often, and we're biased by nature. So we instinctively think like, okay, especially in America, which is what's called a very individualistic society. It's very much like about me. Compare that to Asian countries, for example, which are called collectivistic. It's very about like the family.
Right.
Whereas the U.S., it's very like individually focused. So this is being someone like what you just described, who's more comfortable in a relationship, you're automatically going to get negative biases thrown right back at you. Yeah. They'll say something along the lines of, well, if you can't be alone, you should figure out how to be alone first before you can entertain a relationship.
See, I just don't agree with that statement.
Well, again, when we bring in personality and understanding individual differences into the equation, that statement is overly simplistic and doesn't take into account that my motivations could be very different, and just because you're someone or whoever is someone who might prefer to be in a relationship, that doesn't make it wrong. There's this misjudged idea where it's like, okay, well, if you can't do that, then you need to just go sit in timeout until you can figure that out.
Right. And in some situations, I feel like going and being alone. Okay, so. Mm-hmm. Let's say that there are traumas and that there are things that you need to get over that you have to work on yourself for. And you work on yourself and you get yourself together and you learn to heal, you learn to accept, you learned from whatever it is that you went through, and now you're by yourself. Okay. And some people are they just want to be with somebody else. They just want to be loved. They just want to give love. They just want to be in a relationship. That's what they genuinely want. So they're unhappy because they don't have it. Mm-hmm. And then everyone tells them, well, in order for you to be happy in another relationship, you have to learn to be happy by yourself. And it doesn't compute with me in that way. It's like saying, well, I really want a nice sports car, but I need to learn to be happy without that sports car before I can be happy with the sports car. I guarantee if you want to be happy with a sports car because you want one and you get one, you're probably going to be happy. Yes. You know what I'm saying?
Remember our conversation earlier where I was talking about this idea of what fills you up, and I said like you have to do things that fill up your cup.
Absolutely.
If you only do things, we were talking about depression along this time, if you only do things that empty it, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if I only do activities, things, whatever, that don't like fill me up, then I'll be pouring from an empty cup. So it's effectively like telling someone, hey, I know that being in a relationship is something that fills up your cup, but I need you to just keep pouring and pouring and pouring. And when you run out, just keep going. And if you run out enough, you'll eventually figure it out. That's a terrible way to actually think of that equation because, once again, we talk about empathy, you're not taking the individual's understanding and motivations of what they want. It's like there's this, and again, I will easily argue that our individualistic society plays a part in this belief that you have to be able to figure out how to be alone first in order to make that work. That's just not true. That's not what we see in the literature, and that's not what we see when we take people's individual personalities into account.
I tend to have to agree with that. And I'm going to say also from just personal experience. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much work you put into yourself. Other people are just what you want. it also touches base to this. Think about it this way. What is the largest punishment that we give to someone when they break the law? What's the worst? A murderer, a rapist, something like that. What is you go to prison, what is the worst punishment that they give to you to punish you more?
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. So if you're going to tell me that solitary confinement is what we're using as a punishment, why is it that we should be punishing ourselves to then try to be happy?
Yeah, and that's a good comparison, actually. And solitary confinements, by and large, are beginning to dial back because of research just like this that looks into that. And we know that solitary confinement as a tactic damages the individual more than helps them. There really isn't anything suggesting at all that it benefits the person. So then it's like, okay, how,
Which is exactly why it's a punishment.
Exactly.
So you do this work, you fix yourself, you want to find happiness in somebody else, but you need to be okay. That'd be like saying, if you want to come out of solitary confinement, you need to learn to be happy in solitary confinement. Like, it's not going to work that way. Like,
yes.
Let's look at this realistically.
Yes. And that's not to say you couldn't figure out skills that can make solitary confinement a little better, right?
Which is what makes you insane to begin with.
Right.
I mean, when you're drawing stick figures all over the walls and counting sheep to 3,422,
right,
and trying to find sanity in that, it's going to make you insane. It's the same concept as you could take someone who is never done any crimes wrong or anything in their life, put them in a completely different environment and watch how they change. Because humans are going to adapt to what it is.
Yes.
And what I'm noticing is that a lot of these people that are saying this, I almost believe that a lot of these people that are saying that you should just learn to be happy by yourself are people that have struck out so many times that they're saying that to almost make themselves feel better about the fact that they are still alone and by themselves.
Perhaps. And I mean, I don't want to vilify that other side.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
too much
not.
either, right? Same concept. Different isn't wrong. So, and once again, connects to this idea of, right, if we're trying to have personalities mesh within a relationship, it's pretty darn important that we understand what each person's individual motivations are, right? Like the same example I used earlier. If you have perfectly happy and content people that would put career as their highest motivation, and then they link up with someone else who would put that. Now, if you put someone whose number one priority in life is career with someone whose number one priority in life is a romantic relationship, then it's bound to cause a lot of issues repeatedly.
That is such a cliche one where that is such an issue. You see that all the time. It's probably one of the most common ones that I see is the work versus relationship issue.
Yes.
So, especially with like stay-at-home moms and then go to work all day, or dads that are just gone all the time, or, I mean, it creates a void for conflict. There's so many doors that get open. It's just a matter of time.
Yes. That's where you see some of those differences with men. Again, statistically tend to be more likely to be overly focused on career, and this ties into gender differences, for example, between the motivations of men versus women. It's also the reason when you talk about men's mental health, for example, that you have to understand that though there are a lot of similarities, like you talked about at the beginning of the episode, there are also definite differences, and there's instinctual things programmed into men, and those are typically provide. So if a man feels like he can provide, then that does a lot for him being okay, right? So, and that effect is not nearly as strong against a woman. Again, I'm generalizing here. Of course, there are always specific people that might be different, but generally speaking, men need to feel like they have that. So when I talk to, for example, men that are more likely to be depressed or have notable anxiety, that's a big component of it oftentimes. If they don't feel that they can provide, men really feel that pain, whether they think about it or not. It's something that's pretty well programmed into us, and if we feel like we're falling short of what often amounts to our own personal belief of what that providing should look like, then it tends to follow. What tends to follow that is a host of mental health problems.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. A lot of people I see are very tough on themselves.
Yes.
So they have this idea in their head of where that they should be and how things should be, and if they don't live up to that standard, that's where depression sets in. That's where anxiety sets in. That's where, pretty much losing your self-worth kind of sets in. And I've also noticed with a lot of those kind of people that even when they do accomplish their goals, they actually still don't find the happiness that they're pursuing.
Yes.
It continues. It's a constant rat race. It's you're trapped in a rat race that you can't win. There's no finish line. The goalpost keeps getting moved. You get stuck into that, pattern of style of always thinking, what's next, even when you do accomplish your goals. It's a hard pattern to break. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you're talking about, there's a direct connection, and this is where we kind of skew a little bit away from mental health, but there's a direct connection between what you just said and success. So, for example, when I don't remember if it was a survey or if it was an actual discussion, but they had gotten a majority of the Fortune 500 CEOs in a room. And
that had to be an awesome room.
Right, I'm sure you could learn an incredible amount. And the primary question they asked all of them was whether they felt they deserved to be here. And almost every single one of them said they didn't feel they did. So there's a direct connection between what you're talking about there and success. When people have this like finite or limited belief of like, okay, I made it here, so I'm done, I've made it. Those people tend to not be as successful. So again, there's a trade-off there. Yes, you're more likely to be successful, and that can make you much more miserable and much less likely to feel content with what you have.
Good luck finding a balance between those two.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. I know for myself, I was a workaholic for many, many years.
Sure.
And I continuously worked very hard and didn't know when to stop. I didn't know when enough was enough, when, okay, let's work hard, let's play hard. You stay so tunnel vision focused on your goals and your aspirations of what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And then I would accomplish the goals, and then what's the next goal? And then it almost becomes so normal to you that when you're not in the midst of trying to accomplish a goal, you get depressed. Things like kind of creep up on you that depression kind of creeps in when you're not doing something. And learning to be happy with, learning to enjoy what you've accomplished is very difficult.
Yes, it's a skill to be able to feel enjoyment off of what you had, and I'll return to your earlier statement on balance. And yeah, that's what it boils down to, right? So it's like, okay, how successful do I want to be? And again, we talk about personality here. It's like, okay, so if I'm pressing myself forward all the time with all of my goals and aspirations, and if I'm tossing my own main priority, let's say what we were talking about earlier, let's say your main priority is a romantic relationship, I can easily find myself getting depressed then by becoming overly focused on, let's say, career-related things, and casting aside the most important part of me, which would be the part that's focused on a romantic relationship. So again, like you said, it's about that balance and being able to strike it. And I think, and it's a quick solution, and I think I've seen it be very helpful for a lot of people. It's really as simple as checking in with yourself sometimes. Specifically, American men are the most likely to do so. And again, this ties into this providing concept.
It gives self-value and worth to them.
Yes.
And it's a shame that so many people get caught up in that, and it destroys you from the inside out.
Yes. You still have to be able to zoom out, and like I said, if you take 5 minutes, set a reminder on your phone, if you take 5 minutes to check in with yourself and just review your day. Like, okay, if you already understand your own motivations, you already understand the things that make you most happy, the things that bring the most joy to your life. And if I have an alarm that goes off in my phone, let's say at 9 p.m. every night, and I always take 5 minutes to check in and review my day and say, okay, was my day full of things that I enjoy, partially full, or did I not do anything that actually brings my life joy? if you allow yourself to do this, you being able to steer away from these depressive episodes that I talked about at the beginning is much more likely. And it can be really that simple. It's just a simple reflection on yourself. And when we're go all the time, by the time we get home, we're tired and we just pass out.
Yeah, Netflix and chill sets
Exactly.
in, and you numb the mind.
Exactly.
And the mind doesn't get a chance to catch up to what actually just happened throughout the day. It's like going through a trauma and blocking it out for a while, and then it comes back way later.
Yes.
If you don't take that time to actually self-evaluate,
Good word,
it catches up, and it overwhelms, and then all of a sudden, depression, anxiety sets in, and you wonder how you got there.
Exactly.
So it's time versus actually taking care of your mental well health.
Yes.
But no, I think that's a great strategy.
Simple.
Even 5 minutes a day.
Simple. 5 minutes. And yeah.
I like that. I'll start using that, actually.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone to do so, whether you're experiencing any type of mental health symptoms or not. It's a highly successful strategy to avoid yourself from falling down the rabbit hole. Oftentimes, by the time, for example, people come to see me, it's usually after an extended period of time of not doing that. And then, years go by and they're stuck holding this bag of life that they don't enjoy. There's a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't know it precisely, but I think it encapsulates it well. There's a quote by Jim Carrey, interestingly, that says that depression, again, I'm paraphrasing, but it says that depression is your avatar telling you that it's sick of doing what you're doing, that it's tired of the life that you're trying to keep up. You've
like
moved
that.
so far away from what actually works for you and what would bring you joy that now here you are and you're horribly depressed. And it's like there were so many signs along the way that if you would have taken even 5 minutes to just do an honest evaluation of it, you likely could have steered clear of some of these heavier things.
Yeah, just so that way the viewers know, you and I are obviously extremely great friends.
Yes.
And just touching base on what you just said there, a nickname that I actually have for Brandon here is the Turtle. And he usually always wins the race because he's slow and steady. So it's fascinating to watch, and me, I'm just go all the time.
Right.
And I'll accomplish 90% of all the subjects that I hit on, but I won't 100% complete it.
Yes.
And that's something that I've been working on and learning, and kind of as time goes on, it's amazing when you take a step back and you evaluate yourself.
Yes.
And you see where the areas that you have to work on. But that was always been a fascinating thing where I've watched you accomplish things that you did it at your pace, but you accomplish it 100%.
Yes.
And it's amazing to watch. And I do take a few of those attributes from you, and I try to bring them into my own life a little bit. And then sometimes I just want to, jumpstart you a little bit and
Sure.
get you running along on certain things.
Yep.
Yeah, so balance.
Indeed.
Again, it's always back to balance.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, ultimately, in what we're talking about, it's like slow it down.
Yeah.
If I can slow down and check in with myself, gosh, you can prevent so many things from going wrong.
When it comes to mental health, you have to take it slow, and you have to realize that it's a very slow process. Anything that you're trying to change, these traits have been instilled in you for your whole life.
Yes.
Every day, and a lot of it you don't even realize how it got there. So taking a step back to focus on it, and then getting the tools. It's like watching a podcast like this, or reading books, or doing the research to actually get the tools that you need in order to fix your mental well-being. It's so important. It's so crucial. But it's so there right now at your fingertips with the internet and these podcasts and social media. If you, it's so accessible to you. It just is you making that decision that, hey, you know what? I think that I'm going to work on myself. I think that I'm going to explore these options to make a better me, so that way I have a better quality of life.
Yes, you're right. I mean, ultimately, that's one of the benefits too of this podcast itself. I mean, even this podcast, this episode is offering people an ability to take something from these conversations that they otherwise wouldn't hear. I mean, I don't know how many people don't go into therapist's office, for example, or even have conversations like this. Frankly, it doesn't have to be in a therapist's office. Most people, by and large, are not having these types of conversations. So, for your viewers out there, they can certainly gain a lot from listening to segments like this, because you'll actually be able to get certain skills from these conversations and by the things we talk about that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. So you're certainly offering a platform for the improvement of that.
Right, and I just feel that it's so important, especially with today's day and age and the way that society is today. There's so many distractions to every single person on day to day, whether it's sports, whether it's work, this, that, social media. Look at some of these apps that you get on, and 4 or 5 hours goes by and you're like, holy crap, I've been zoned into this, watching these crazy videos. I mean, sure, everybody loves watching someone set themselves on fire, but it doesn't mean that you can't still check in with yourself later. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's very difficult in today's day and age. I see those memes with the phone where it's attached to their face, and life is going on around them. And I'm not saying that I'm absolutely not a victim of this, or that I don't do it myself.
I would argue probably most people are.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, it just happens. It's there.
Yes.
It's how you catch up with your friends. It's almost like it's part of your day-to-day life. But it's definitely changed society.
No doubt. And if we take a step back from that and continue with this concept of mental health, it's like, so you have what are called coping skills, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like, okay, if I'm in a stressful situation, or if I'm depressed or anxious or any sad, just had a major life change, whatever, you have different styles of coping skills that break down into different categories. Again, it's exactly what it sounds like. They're things that you do to cope with whatever. And you have different groups of those, and one group is avoidance. And so the idea of what you're talking about with phones, that's exactly what that is. It's like, and to be clear, that is a coping skill. The problem with anything in the avoidance category is that it's, two things. One, it's the most likely category to be abused. And you could tie this into like drinking, not saying all drinking, but if you're using drinking or something else as a means to cope, then you're running the risk of overusing it. And once you do that, you actually begin to get further and further from yourself. So, like, if you're going through some really intense thing, this is where your avoidance style coping skills are helpful. So if I feel absolutely terrible today, and I can tune into a Netflix special and it distracts me, that can be very helpful in that moment.
Right. Well, thank you. That's about all the time that we actually have for today. Thank you for joining us here on Mac Life Podcasting. And today we were doing, obviously, men's mental health and women's mental health, and discussing about traumas and things. And Brandon, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
I think we definitely touch base over a lot of different topics that I hope help you guys going forward. And very soon we're going to be doing a live feed where you guys can interact with us, and we can do kind of questions and answers and go over topics that are actually on your guys' minds. I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, no, that's something the sky could really be the limit on that. Certainly, if you had any thoughts along the line of when you were watching this podcast today, we'd certainly like if you shared them with us, because we'd be more than happy to have discussions about the things that are bothering you all.
Absolutely. And I look forward to that. And I hope that you guys, like and subscribe. And I hope you like the content that we're putting out. We're just trying to put out more awareness for, mental health, because it seems to be definitely a very large problem going on right now. And a lot of people don't know how to address it. Wouldn't you agree?
All day. All day. It's only just keeps increasing over time.
It does. It definitely does. So thank you very much for joining us. And I think that about wraps it up for us today.
That'll do it.
So yeah, let's get out of here.
All right.